Hey guys, this is Mrs. Jurechko coming to you from my couch in my living room, and this today is our first e-learning lesson for Monday, March 16th. I would like to go through the volume lesson with you in your instruction books. So if you could open your instruction books to page 262, and we're going to go through these pages 262 and 263 together, talking about volume. Be sure, if you haven't already done so, that you go back and reread the pages that we read together in class on Friday, which were pages 254 and 255. On those pages, we introduced some important ideas about volume. And volume is how we measure three-dimensional objects and how much space is on the inside of them. And in fifth grade, we measure the volume of a right rectangular prism, which would be something like this pencil case. You can see that all of the faces of it are rectangles, and all of the angles on here are right angles. So this would be an example of a right rectangular prism. And if we wanted to know how much space was contained inside of this right rectangular prism, we could find its volume. Volume, as we know, is measured not in square units like area, but in cubic units. And cubic units are cubes with measurements of 1 unit on each side. So 1 unit on the length, 1 unit on the width, and 1 unit of the height. Okay, so by now you should be looking at pages 262 and 263 in your instruction book. And we have a word problem at the top where it says, Abigail used cardboard to build a rectangular prism like the one shown below. What is the volume of the prism? So then I'd like you to take your pencil and I'd like you to label some of those measurements on that rectangular prism. The measurement on the bottom, the one that says 4 centimeters, I'd like you to label that as the length of that rectangular prism. The other measurement on the bottom, the one that's 2 centimeters, I'd like you to label as the width, and the one that goes sort of vertical, the 3 centimeters, I'd like you to label that as the height. So now when I talk about the length, width, and height of that rectangular prism, you know which measurements we're talking about. If you notice the length and the width on the bottom, they meet together to form a right angle, just like the length and width of a rectangle, which is what is on the bottom of that prism. It's a rectangle. If you look down at Picture It, they show us what that rectangular prism would look like if it was filled with cubes. And we can find the volume of the prism by filling it with unit cubes and counting the number of cubes. So when we look at the cubes, you can see that on the bottom, there would be a layer of 8 cubes because that has a length of 4 and a width of 2, so that the bottom of that would have 8 cubes because it makes a 4 by 2 rectangle. And then there are 2 additional layers of 8 cubes stacked on top. So we have 8, 8, and 8. So that would make the 24 cubes to fill the rectangular prism. If you look down at Model It, we can kind of see where if they don't even show us all the cubes, we could still figure out that it was 24 cubes by counting the number of cubes in one layer and multiplying by the number of layers. So if we're looking at cubes that are each 1 cubic centimeter, there would be 8 cubes in each layer and 3 layers. 8 cubes times the 3 layers equals 24 cubes. Now we're going to go through and we're going to talk about the questions on page 263, and you're welcome to fill those in as we go. I'll try to stop and pause after I talk about each question. Look at the models in the previous page. How could you find the number of cubes in one layer without counting the cubes? So think about that. If we look at that rectangular prism on page 262, if we couldn't see all the cubes, like in the model at the top in the word problem, we don't see the cubes in that one. How could we find how many cubes would fill that bottom layer without counting them? But if we think about how that layer is a rectangle and what we know about the area of a rectangle, that's how we could find how many cubes are in the bottom layer. And we could do that by multiplying the length times the width. The length and the width would be multiplied together to get the number of cubes in the bottom layer. Once you know how many, question number 3, once you know how many cubes are in one layer, what else would you need to do to find the volume? Well, what you would need to do would be to know how many layers there are of the same amount. So if we knew there were 8 cubes on the bottom, we would also need to know how many layers of 8 cubes and multiply by that many of layers. Question number 4. Since there are 8 cubes in each layer, and you know there are 3 layers, what multiplication expression can you write to find the volume of the prism? So stop for a second and write a multiplication expression there. If we knew there were 8 in one layer and there are 3 layers, please write a multiplication problem now. And you should have written 8 times 3. So what is the volume of Abigail's rectangular prism? Since there are 3 layers of 8, 8 times 3 is 24. And that would be labeled as 24 cubic centimeters. And we talked about on Friday how that would be labeled with centimeters and then the little 3 as an exponent because we multiplied 3 dimensions to get the volume. Question number 6 is really important, and I want you to write this one down too. Explain how you can use multiplication to find the volume of any rectangular prism. So what you can do to find the number of cubes in one layer is multiply the length times the width. And once you have that answer, multiply that by the number of layers, which is the height. So ultimately, this leads us to the volume formula. Volume of a rectangular prism is length times width times height. If you need to watch this video again to catch any of the answers to those questions and write them down, and you can write them in your own words, you can do that. What I would like you to do now is answer the try it questions at the bottom of page 263. So I want you to pause the video, answer those questions, and then I'm going to go over the answers to those questions in just a second. Number 7, what is the volume of the rectangular prism below? So first we need to take a look at the dimensions of that rectangular prism. So that rectangular prism has a length of 3 and a width of 3. So we could multiply that length and width to find out that there are 9 cubes in one layer. My husband's about to come in and interrupt. So 9 cubes in one layer, and then there are 3 layers of 9. So 9 times 3 would be 27 cubes. So it has a volume of 27 cubic inches. Number 8, Mr. Wong filled the figure below with 1 foot unit cubes to find its volume. What is the volume of that figure? It has a length of 2 and a width of 1. So the bottom layer is a rectangle that's 2 by 1. So that would be 2. There's only 2 layers, so 2 times 2 would be 4. And you can see just by counting the cubes on that one that it has a volume of 4 cubic feet. So I want you to watch the second video that I post in your Google Classroom that goes through this again and shows also the volume formula of length times width times height and where it comes from, and then complete the attached form and submit. And I will talk to you tomorrow.